Bonsoir tout le monde. Alors, on va dérouler en anglais, mais certainement quand ça vient de la période des questions, on peut prendre en français. Je traduirai tout ça. So we'll continue, and the session will be in English this evening. Excited to be here. Hi, Michael. Great to see you.
Is this working? Is this working? Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
We can all hear. Thank you, Jean-François. That was a great opening. I'm just going to do a bit of housekeeping as well. There's a few thank yous, and then I'm going to do a bio so we get to know Mr. Nesbitt a little bit better, and then we'll get into a conversation. And I think we've been talking for a few days now, and we were just on CBC. They did this thing where they did the pre-interview separately, Michael in Winnipeg, me in Ottawa, but not in the same time. So we arrived in the studio wondering what each other was going to say, but I think it went okay. So I have a few thank yous for the exhibition. Really, I'm really excited about the show, and it takes many voices, many people to come together to bring the works together. So I did want to highlight some who are here tonight. Ellen Trekiokis, our designer on the exhibition. You could give a wave. And right next to Ellen is Christopher Egenball, who is the senior project exhibition manager on the project. The installation team, I just posted on Instagram a few shots of the installation team high up on getting up to install these Richard Tuttle works, especially Karen Bergmans and Aaron Schmidt, and many colleagues in conservation. A lot of these works are historical. Emily Minmander, Lily Durrani, and Janie Kennedy, and there are many others but those were sort of a team that came together to put the show together over the last few weeks. Michael, should I read a bit of...
Bonsoir, monsieur.
Bonsoir. Bonsoir. Can I say you were born in Winnipeg in 1935? Is that okay to say? You
Yes,
provided on your bio.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
I think we should, because
Yeah, okay.
and you've been really you attended the University of Manitoba. You were in Winnipeg, born and raised. Following university, Michael, in the late 50s, moved to Toronto. We're going to talk a little bit about that, I hope, where you really, you made your name in business, but you also, business and arts is what you studied. We are going to talk about, that's where I think your passion for art and collection began. Michael returned to Winnipeg in 1964 to join his father's mortgage business, which became Montrose Mortgage, and he was also director of Brookfield Corp for about a decade, and you've done many, many things. Served on the board of numerous institutions and organizations, including Ducks Unlimited, the Winnipeg Art Gallery, and I'm learning more recently, he was a squash champion, and he was president of the Winnipeg Squash Racket Club and the chairman of Squash Manitoba. And that goes back to when you said you were 15 or 16. Your life in squash. Recently, Michael was named Manitoba Opera's 2025 recipient of the Gail Asper Award in honor of his generosity towards the art and cultural life of Manitoba. And I just thought I'd read very quickly the tribute they made to Michael, because I think it really speaks to you as a person and your generous spirit. So Michael Nesbitt's life and career are a testament to the power of ethical leadership and the profound impact of philanthropy. His contributions to the arts, education, and community development have left an indelible mark on Winnipeg, making it a better place for future generations. His vision and commitment to advancing the artistic and educational life of the community is inspiring. And so here, we're honoring this evening this similar, philanthropic spirit, but here I think, as Jean-François mentioned, we're really looking at tying it to a national mandate and vision, and also getting into the way, we'll see it in this room tonight, that when it comes to collecting art, you're bringing works to Canada, and I think it's always been first and foremost to make sure they're seen by the widest amount of people possible. And so I can't wait to talk about many things, but first, did I miss anything you want to add to the bio? No? Okay. But I also wanted to say that there are many things I think for you to be proud of, but you're also 3 children, a number are here tonight, and 4 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren, aged 13 to 5. So thank you, Michael. Okay. And you're an avid cyclist. We shouldn't forget.
That's true. Was.
Well, I mean, you figured out the tandem cycle in Europe, at least.
True.
So, yeah. Well, welcome, and what do you think? Can we start there?
Yes, go ahead, start.
What you're
well,
seeing?
Thank you all for coming. It's good to see such a large crowd. I hope you enjoy it. I certainly have in collecting it, and it's quite a thrill to see all these people. Most of you are smiling.
And I mean, some of these works, we'll talk about them, and I'll talk about a number of them. We'll introduce them as best we can. We'll be giving a talk on Saturday where we'll get into the details of many things, probably more than we will here. But some of these works you've lived with some of the works have come directly to us.
Yes.
Talk about that. But have you seen your collection kind of brought together in a way like this, I guess, outside of your home?
No, never.
Okay.
No. Last time I saw these pieces are in my living room and my dining room, with few exceptions. The puddles on the wall I purchased in New York, and I've never seen them exhibited before.
Right.
Of course, the Agnes Martin I've not seen before, but most of these things were in my house.
Nice. Well, we'll get into a little bit of that, but can we talk about, I think, your beginnings? I mean, can you tell us a little bit about how you became a collector, when, and sort of how things came about?
Certainly. I grew up in a family that had no particular interest in culture.
Michael, just
I don't particularly know why, but there was no discussion about art, particularly, or music in my household. But when I graduated from university at age 21 and was married, my sister, who was 2 years younger than I was, gave me a check for $300, which was quite a bit of money then. That's what I made per month when I started at the TD Bank with my commerce degree. And she said, "You really think you're well educated, but you're not, and you should take this check and buy some work an art piece when you get to Toronto." And that was the motivation for me to get involved with art. And in Toronto in those days, in 1957, there were only about 5 or 6 galleries. So on a Saturday, I could go down and basically see what was available in the Toronto market. And the Toronto market at the time was very vibrant, and there was lots of art being shown there. Michael Snow, Joyce Wieland, Jack Bush, people like that. And that was the beginning of my interest in art. It was what you might say forced upon me by my sister.
I think too. So that was the start. I was really. But what was it when you started there? So this was the late 50s, early 60s.
1957.
1957, and it's a very small scene in Toronto, but yet at the same time there was a lot happening.
Yes.
From your, and what did you start collecting? And I think just as your answer, is it possible to put the mic, Michael, just
sure.
more that way?
The first work of art I still have. It's called Two Red Barns. It was by an artist called Pablo Arola, who I don't think paints anymore. And interestingly enough, I bought it from a gallery owned by a fellow called Walter Moos, who had a European connection. And since then, I've been dealing with his son David, who is here, with his son Ezra. They came from Toronto for this event, but historically, since 1957, a lot of my art has been purchased with the Moos family support. But what was the question again?
It was sort of that. I wanted to know kind of who were the players, who were you dealing with, and you also were saying that you started in Canadian, but something shifted, and I'm kind of curious what happened.
Of course, I didn't have much money then, and $35 was a lot. So all I could buy was prints and so on. And the more I became interested in art, the more I became interested in other than Canadian art. But my pocketbook demanded that I could only buy Canadian art and often prints. But so that was my first movement into the art world, and that's what I developed mostly was Canadian art, which I then decided to sell basically all at once and move into the international and contemporary field, which I did, I don't know, maybe 20 years ago.
Okay. And that also meant to move from Mose Senior to to the son, I think, and David is here, and we can acknowledge David has had a real impact on the collection.
No question about it.
Yeah, and also I think the interface with the gallery. David Mose is a longtime curator as well, and certainly in terms of also color field painting and American modernism, so yeah, no, that's fascinating. And then from there, you're in Toronto. It still made an impact. You said you've got good connections there, but you really come back to Winnipeg and establish yourself after that.
Mm-hmm. That's correct.
Yeah.
That's
and you continue to collect.
No, I didn't. That was I hadn't thought of that before, but that's a good point. Coming from Toronto to Winnipeg was a bit of a wake-up call in terms of art, because there really was not much happening there, at least from my perspective after being in Toronto. So I felt isolated. I felt taken. I was not in touch with the market anymore. I didn't know what was going on particularly. Now, that's not to say that Winnipeg didn't have a vibrant art scene, but it didn't compare to Toronto. And Toronto then was very akin and very close to New York. And lots of things were happening in New York at that time. So that, in part, is why I decided to sell my Canadian art and focus on American art. But it was a lonely time in Toronto, in Winnipeg, in terms of art world.
Was that a catalyst for the kind of philanthropy that you've done in Winnipeg? You've done a lot in Winnipeg and Manitoba. A lot of, also shout out to Winnipeggers in the room, because I think there's quite a number here, and everybody who traveled for this evening. Thank you so much for joining.
No, I don't think so particularly. No.
All right. But you've... Well, it's interesting because I know that for whatever reason you were collecting, as you kind of, in the last 20 years, you've collected major things, and a lot of those have been seen in Winnipeg. So the Theaster Gates work that's astonishing behind us here, this was a piece that I kind of learned about through your collection, but also an exhibition at Plug-In Gallery in Winnipeg. So a major work that was there. I think the Lawrence Wiener, which this show is after, and we'll talk a little bit more about all these works, but I think you had that on loan at the university, was it? It was in a theater hall,
Yeah,
I believe.
the University of Manitoba, yeah.
Yeah. So I think there's been, it's been interesting, and I think I read that, one of your goals was to also bring some of these big names to Canada, but also to Winnipeg, at least in the beginning as well.
No, I wouldn't say that.
No, just national.
No, I bought it for my house and for myself, for the most part. I mean, some of the works I bought specifically with National Gallery in mind. Yeah. Often I would discuss with you may recall, whether we should buy them together, but fundamentally I purchased them initially because I liked them and they were for me.
Fair enough. Yeah. What do you, well, let's talk about that. What's the first thing, you mentioned color in the CBC interview, but what's the first thing when you see a work and say, that's the one for me?
Well, of course that has changed over time. Yeah. And so I think, I'm attracted to color, basically. So things that are colorful I'm interested in, but from that I also think about the philosophical content of a lot of the abstract work and the conceptual work. Mm-hmm. So I think I have sort of two levels in my mind when I'm looking at art, but for example, I don't think Theaster Gates is particularly colorful. No. It's gold and black, whereas the Truett is colorful, the Baran is colorful. But if you think of the Gates piece for a moment, that's loaded with all kinds of historical references and current aspects of modern African-American life. Yeah. And so that's quite different from color. Yeah. So I think I have those two aspects to the kind of art that I'm interested in.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because the Theaster Gates, it doesn't have color on the surface, and just I'll say a few words about the kind of show, and one of the things we wanted to do here was also talk about references and talk about artistic dialogues. And so in working with your collection in this way, the Theaster Gates is a direct quote to the Donald Judd that we have, not this one, but Donald Judd's work. So Donald Judd being, sort of you associate Donald Judd with minimalism, with, that moment in the late 50s into the 60s when artists start to really question the container of art and want to make everything referential back to the context of seeing, the context of viewing and understanding a work. And I've always been fascinated by this work by Theaster Gates, because for Donald Judd, I mean, he's thinking about the art world, yes, but he's thinking about museums, but he's really thinking about a set of references which probably were very different than what Theaster Gates wants to bring in terms of socio-political content, historical content. So Gates has quoted the shelf of Judd, but said, I'll fill it with what these are is a whole volume of Jet magazine, Jet and Ebony magazine. But Theaster Gates, who's based in Chicago, has bought the archive of the Johnson Publishing Company, and with that has every Jet magazine. And so these are volumes which have then been bound, and he's written a kind of concrete poem inspired by those poems. But I'm thinking the Jet magazines themselves are full of color. I mean, that's what it is, and it's about the vibrancy of, black diasporic culture, and also an entrepreneurial spirit. So to me, this work makes a lot of sense in terms of it being here. But I think it's really fun that we can make these kinds of pairings. You met Theaster, I think, before you purchased this work.
I flew down with David Most some years ago to meet with him in his studio in Chicago, and that was a mind-blowing experience, because he's an extremely interesting, sensitive, and intelligent man, and that was one of the highlights for me of collecting art, is the ability to meet artists like that. And I've met other artists such as Richard Tuttle and Lawrence Weiner, but spending 2 hours with Theaster Gates was special for me. And one of the aspects about Gates, which is particularly interesting, is the fact that he takes a great deal of his profits and the money he makes and devotes it back into the Chicago slums where he grew up. No, I don't think that he grew up there, but certainly he devotes huge sums of money into buying old buildings, converting them to libraries and to cafes and so on. And he's a very, very social, responsible person. And that was another aspect of meeting him that continues to resonate with me.
Yeah. Can you talk about that aspect? Because you mentioned it also in the interview we just did. But, a lot of your work, the work that you purchase, yes, it's the color, it's aesthetically, it's something that you really want to engage with, but you've also, I think, kind of, when you look at the collection, and we can talk about Jenny C. Jones, I mean, the two contemporary voices here, I think, bring in, the idea with this context was really to say that at the base, it's that artists looking at artists. And what I've learned is I think that artists, when they look at artists, are interested in what artists do. And a lot of things get set aside for that. So Theaster Gates, who's thinking about what you're talking about, giving back, talking about black diasporic history, the history of the U.S., but for when he talks about Donald Judd, which really didn't share many references in that way at all, I don't think. He says what he learned from Donald Judd, and actually visiting the Chinati Foundation and seeing a whole room of them, was that Donald Judd taught him that artworks need time and space. And that's something he's kept and held in his practice. So all to say, I think we kind of get snippets into underrepresented voices, but I just wanted to ask about your collecting practice, because you have sort of the Frank Bowling, which we can talk about. You do have a history of kind of looking at voices that are not necessarily the main, that have been underrepresented, I guess.
Well, that's a good point. I don't know why, but some years ago I became interested in African American artists for a number of reasons, but in part, it was because they had been marginalized and demeaned, and they weren't getting the attention that the white people were getting, and they were creating fantastic art. So I began to look at acquiring art done by African Americans, and then I realized, which I should have done initially, was that women African American artists were hardly recognized at all. And that's true of not only, African Americans, but it's true of a lot of society. Women don't get the recognition that they should. And so I subdivided my interest, if that's the word, into looking at people like Jenny Jones, and there are other artists that I purchased which the National Gallery have, which are not here. But in part, it was a reflection of my feeling that these people had been set aside, so to speak, and they deserved more recognition.
And one of those that we don't have up, we've got a lot of things, and you'll see in the lower contemporary galleries a work by Cy Gavin called Beaver Dam that's in the contemporary galleries, the Frank Bowling. You know, we're a big group. I had this urge that we could walk over there, but maybe we'll just leave it here for now. But please do go. It's sitting right next to the Voice of Fire, and this is a Guyanese British artist who, you know, was in New York and in the context of abstract expressionism, very active, and then, you know, some were collected and he wasn't. And I think it's about the content that he brought into color, colonial content, looking at, map of Africa. Like it brought subject matter in at a moment in modern art history when that was a little bit like you'd shrouded in abstraction. So many things here, but you brought up also women, and I actually wanted to, because when we were writing the text for the show and everything, I had talked about gaps in art history, but then I thought, actually, it's not so much about gaps in art history, because all of the artists in this room, including Jenny C. Jones, who's really come up, and Theaster, have their place. I mean, I think they're in the story of modern Western, minimalist and conceptual practices, but within the collection, the collection of the National Gallery, there is a huge strength in Donald Judd, former, very renowned, really, I think, internationally Bryden Smith, who just was on the, you've talked about this with Toronto, like on the pulse of what was happening in New York, had acquired things like the Brillo boxes by Andy Warhol out of a very famous show of Warhol at Stable Gallery in New York, like 2 years after they were made. And we try to, I think, do that even now to follow the scene. But then there were certain things that didn't, so any collection is going to be the perspective of certain things get brought in, and at the time maybe some things don't. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the Anne Truitt, because here's the color in the middle of the room, and the dialogue I really like here between the Agnes Martin and the Anne Truitt and the early Richard Tuttle that's not in your collection, and we'll talk about that, from 1968. And this to me really was a nice echo of expanding, and really artists that were thinking about the legacy of a Donald Judd and kind of the prescriptions or the kind of dictates of minimalism, but really kind of bringing a more just bringing something else in. For Anne Truitt, it was about the layers of the paint, and that every stroke on these sculptures was something to do with her and where she was in the world, and sort of bringing in that kind of subjective context, which I think some of the other artists in this room might have eschewed. But do you have a story around the purchase of this? Because you said you had a smaller one, and you were looking for a bigger one by Anne Truitt.
Not really, Jonathan. I really admired her work, and to purchase a large work like that was very difficult. It took us a long time, perhaps a year, to find one. Okay. And I can't comment about it really, other than it's attractive and I like it, and it's done by a woman. I mean, it's pretty simple for me.
No, but I was curious about the kind of that tenacity of like something that you decide you want, and then like you said, you kind of keep on it, I guess. You don't, you just...
Well, that's true. That's true.
And I should finish the thought around the gaps in the collection, because Anne Truitt was an artist that we didn't have in the collection, and so this allows us to bring something in which makes for a broader story. The Richard Tuttle, which is the work that's untitled here from 1968. This was a show. I think there's a great art forum article on this body of work that the gallery acquired many years ago, and Tuttle had taken these irregular octagonal, canvases, had twisted them, folded them, dipped them, dyed them, and then dried them, and then took them to a gallery in New York, and the instructions, as far as I could tell, were hang them in any which way. So, and then this is actually getting into one of the catalysts for this show, is that, so this is a work that's been in the collection. It hasn't been on view for a little while, but it would go back with our Judds and everything else. And then last fall, I got a call I guess from David, saying that you were in a show of these 3 new works by Richard Tuttle. So these behind everyone are 3 pieces from 2025. And you were in the exhibition. I want you to talk about that. But you, then the message to me was that you would, if the gallery was interested, you would proceed, and you would pay us once you bought them. So we did, but immediately this was sort of the thing of thinking, well, this is fascinating because 2025, this is an artist that goes back with the history and has outlived, of a slightly older generation than Judd. Bought a work of Agnes Martin's when he was a student and kind of looked her up and said, and they became, lifelong confidants. But here we have 2 works, one in the collection, one of the generosity of Michael saying, are you interested, that allows us to see a 50-year spread. And I think that's something which really spoke to thinking through the collection and how you collect and how these things kind of, coincide. So anyways, that worked out, but you were in the show, and I think you have a bit of a history with Richard Tuttle. And if you can just do the mic.
Actually, I do. But what's interesting, I haven't seen these pieces, that piece, and that piece, since I bought them in New York in September last year. So it's interesting to see them here in a different space, and also to see them, up close again. And it's a revelation to me to see how neat they are. Particularly, I love this one behind the chap in the white shirt. That's a neat work of art. But what was the question? Did I have met him before? Yes, I did. I brought him to Winnipeg for I forget why, and he was at my house, and we had a reception for the local artists, and yeah, that was he was at my house, and David came with him on the airplane. Yes, that's true.
Well, and that's the sort of thing. Richard Tuttle has had. I don't know, and I'm not. We always joke like Warhol's a kind of household name. A lot of, I realize, artists don't become that. But in terms of influence, I find with a generation of artists, and especially now with the tactile sensibility of artists, that I think whether it's in reaction to screens, whether it's that, those artists that want to make things and think about that, that kind of world making, including Abbas Akavan, who we're working with for Venice. When I mentioned about the show and Richard Tuttle, he said, this is my, hands down, this artist, almost an alchemist, transform materials. I love the one that you like here. I think this was when we were, so it's funny, so I mentioned the installation team, but Tuttle, we had a kind of back and forth through his gallery, actually, to install these. And this is chicken wire with these sort of the textile pieces that are coming off. And then I like this one because it's sort of an ode to painting. It's got a bit of a sculptural dimension, but he doesn't want his work to be any of these things. He sort of calls them drawings, like sketches. And so we kind of landed on that one. But some of the chicken wire, of course, when they arrived, were a little bit bent. This one behind, Mika, hello, was a little bit so our conservator had all these questions, and then I emailed, and the response was, thank you so much for this diligent work and for all of the work on the show. I think the works arrive as they arrive, and that becomes the status of the work. So, we still matched the picture as best as we could, but I kind of love that idea. And so and that's kind of Tuttle, it goes back to sort of the way that he wanted the octagonal work to be hung. So we had created these templates, photographic templates that were the same scale so that we could pin them on the wall to be able to make them, because he didn't provide any instructions, which is also, I think, very much part of the work. And then we proceeded from there. And then we decided to try one high, and he was fine with it, and I think any other artist might not have asked. But suddenly, I think the room with the Lawrence Weiner in this kind of started to elevate in a way that we really quite liked.
Good. I'm glad you like it.
And then the other thing here that happens in galleries is in the next room is our Duchamp room, and you'll see there that Marcel Duchamp, who's had an influence on many of these artists, that the ceiling becomes a part of the work in there. So it's fun to be able to think through the collection. Maybe we could talk about that. And can you talk a little bit about, because you support, as Jean-François said, the national engagement program of the gallery. You've been so involved with Winnipeg and Manitoba and so generous. Have you always also had a real national frame in mind when you're thinking through your philanthropy? No. So where is that coming? Is that developing?
Well, I guess I'll answer that in two ways. One is the national engagement project is one thing, and offering my collections to the gallery is another thing. Both, of course, support the gallery. Mm-hmm. But the national engagement initiative came to me, as many things do, from other people. Mm. I find if I look back on my philanthropy over the years, very few of the things I've done emanate from myself. They always come to me from other people. I either expand on them or whatever. But the endowment idea came to me when a friend came to my house and said to me, you know, you've got this great collection. It's too bad that this doesn't circulate around the country. And I said, well, what can we do about that? And he said, furthermore, think about all the art that's sitting in the vaults of Ottawa, and nobody ever sees the damn stuff. Why can't we get it across the country? And I thought, wow, that's an interesting idea. So I inquired about that, and of course I was told that the budget doesn't allow for that. There was no money to transmit the art across the country. And so I said, well, if I could help you with that, would you do it? So that's how that came about. But that's quite different from giving art. It's the same, but it's different. But that's how that started.
Right.
And I can't say that the idea for giving art to the National Gallery came about from anything other than a general feeling that that's where good art should be.
Yeah. Well, I think, and I am keen, and I know many are standing, thank you, and I think there could be some questions from the room. I might turn to that very quickly, but maybe we could just say a word or two about the work that kind of started, which, the Frank Bowling, the Middle Passage, because that was the first piece, so that was 2022, but the conversation of that started quite a bit before, and I do urge everyone to go and see that work, but that is a major work of art. I mean, that is a painting that we talk about donations or works being transformative, but gifts being transformative to a narrative. And I think for that room that is devoted to, it's the Shirley Thompson Gallery. It's been a shrine in a way since Moïse Safdie built this beautiful building, to know that it was going to have the voice of fire, know it was going to be an ode to American modernism to a certain extent, and now that work changes the narrative a lot, and there's a few other works that are starting to go into that room to kind of broaden and expand. So maybe we could just, before I open it up, that was a major purchase, I think, at the time, and there's a bit of a story maybe with how you came to have that piece, the Frank Bowling, the Middle Passage.
Well, not really much of a story.
That's all.
I flew over to Munich to look at the exhibit that had been put together by a London dealer, and it frankly was mind-boggling. There was a huge room in Munich full of wonderful Bowlings. I'd never heard of him. And I decided, with David Mose's advice, to pick one, but we could have picked two or three.
At the time,
and then, of course, Bowling was relatively unknown. And since then, he's become much more famous, shall we say. But it was a simple story. Just get on the plane and go and have a look.
Well, that's how, that's different from the story of the Cy Gavin downstairs. This one...
That's true.
Do you want to talk about that one?
Yeah, I will. Cy Gavin is an African-American artist that was brought to my attention, and there was a show in New York, and I didn't have any room in my house anymore, so I thought I would see if the National Gallery would like it, and I would buy it for them. So we got the dealer on a Zoom call from London, and we had the curator from the National on the phone, myself, And we looked at it, and I liked it, and I bought it, and I've never seen it. And I'm going to
Still
see
haven't seen it.
I'm going to see it very shortly, as soon as this is over. It's hanging up somewhere here.
This was in COVID time. So I remember we really didn't have many options, and I mean, a lot of that is,
on the Beaver Dam thing. I mean,
Yeah.
when you think about it, here's a young African American. I was living in New England, who painted something which is very, shall we say, Canadian, like the Beaver Dam.
Yeah.
And so that had an appeal to me, because I looked at other works that he had for sale, and but being able to buy something with the Beaver Dam on it, I thought was kind of neat.
yeah.
So
I recall looking through a
you
number
can tell
of the works
this is a
in the
very
show.
intellectual process I go through.
Well, you'll see that, when you do see it, the context here, and this is something, say a lot about the context in the National Gallery. I mean, it's interesting, in the Shirley Thompson Gallery, the Frank Bowling tells an art historical story, and a historical one, about Frank Bowling, Sir Frank, being in New York at the time, and that really does bring 1970 that into the narrative, and chronologically speaking. What I think is interesting with the Cy Gavin is it's next to a wonderful Inuit sculpture of deer, of this huge elk, and you see that this beaver dam, the painterly qualities, really do match the kind of the sculpture that you see beside it. And I love that. I was thinking about, and I have yet to meet Cy Gavin. I'm sure we will at some point, but just at the National Gallery of Canada, I think putting Inuit art, Indigenous art within a global context, Canadian art in a global context, that's a great example of how we can do that and what we can do, and it's certainly with major works that come through as well to open up and expand that dialogue. There's many more things that I'd like to say, but maybe I think we should open it up if there are any immediate questions. I'd be happy to, and I think our colleague Jessica has a microphone. So are there any questions for...
We have to have it in French.
Oui, on peut faire en français aussi.
Oui,
C'est vrai,
oui.
Merci pour toi.
No, I'm kidding. Come on. I'm pulling your leg, Jonathan.
Okay, well, I think we'll start to wrap. The one thing, though, because that was a great... Oh, one anecdote. We were installing the Theaster gates, and also it came up today, we didn't talk about the Lawrence Wiener and the whole... did we talk about the Lawrence Wiener? No. The title of the show? Things which are per se continuous, which, I think it's pretty straightforward, just kind of makes sense, but I'm joking. I think it's a bit cryptic, but it's Lawrence Wiener, and just to say a few words, because, again, for an artist we didn't have in the collection, we've got some multiples, but nothing major by this artist who really was one of the key figures of conceptual art, like when art became immaterial. The famous story with Lawrence Wiener is that he made sculptures. He was a sculptor out of school, and some of his sculptures got destroyed very early on, and he realized, well, hold on, if I made the sculpture and the sculpture existed as an idea in my head and I could make it, then the idea must stay no matter what form that sculpture takes. And so his work since then has been, language and the materials referred to is what every credit line will read. And so when the show came together, and I think as we were talking about these lineages between one generation and another generation, and even within a generation, what artists are reflecting. And I also like to say this is a moment, and you probably got a sense, the 60s, the 70s, isms, modernism, you go to a show, and I think from my sense of it, it mattered. What Tuttle did when he made this gesture would have affected other artists in a very fundamental way in terms of form. And so you have all these things going on, and then bringing in another generation who are thinking about a lot of socio-political contexts. I really love this the title here, because I think the references to Aristotle, and there's probably maybe some philosophers in the room much more schooled than me, but the idea that philosophical idea that a line is something that is per se continuous, that no matter how much you break up a line, you theoretically can't break it to the point where it's not connected in some infinitesimally small way. And so I sort of like that as a thought of all of these works are still in a line. And, I think even in line with the collection here, with your collection, they're coming together. But the line between Theaster Gates and, I was going to say, installing this on July 4th, was, if you read the poem, this keeps on resonating. And then the reason I brought up Wiener is because when we were doing the tour today with our interpreters and this is wonderful, Wiener means these to be open-ended, his sculptures on the wall, they take on the meaning depending on who's seeing it, who's reading it, but the lines are drawn was what somebody picked up on today, which is also very interesting. So that was the catalyst for the title of the show, but I think it sort of speaks to, I hope anyways, the way that these works are all part of a continual ebb and flow that across generations and across time.
You said it, not mine.
Okay, then. Well, I think we'll leave it there.
No,
and do you want to say something about the Wiener?
About Wiener.
Yeah. Please.
I had that work commissioned for my house.
You did? Okay.
Along with a silhouette. But what was interesting about it is he said, well, I'm not going to do this unless you write an essay about yourself. And I thought, what the hell is this? Why do I have to write an essay about myself to get him to do a work of art? So I spent some time, I didn't know what to say. And I think he was pulling my leg.
You wrote the essay, though.
Oh, yeah, of course I did.
How long was the essay?
Pardon?
How long was the essay? I mean, did he give you a word count?
No, but it was crazy. It was nuts. And one of the things I talked about was playing squash, which is a game I love to play. And of course, I thought he picked up a lot. He picked up something about the lines in the squash court when he did that. But that's the way I look at things from a simplistic Winnipeg point of view.
That's amazing. I don't think there's anything. I mean, that's a great story.
Well, I just thought about it.
And it's interesting because, and I don't know why I didn't ask you that before. And here I went on this whole. Well, we've named the show after it, so that's going to stand. Mm-hmm. But we can. But multiple interpretations are what Lawrence Wiener was all about. But it's also because I could never find an image of this work, and I was like, where does this work exist? So the fact that this was a commission makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And it's a great piece. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, Michael, am I wrapping up? Jeff, are you wrapping up? Okay, I'm going to thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Thank you, Michael, for this chat. And thank you for your generosity and the generosity here this evening and overall. But and thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thank you.
And enjoy. We're still open. And go see the Frank Bowling.